Everyone, and welcome. This is episode 362 of Milwaukee's Tailgate Brewers podcast, part of the MKE Tailgate Network. I am James, joined this week just before the holiday season by Ryan and Spencer. Paul's out this week due to holiday shenanigans, but happy to have Spencer here for our last official episode of the 2024 calendar year. So Spencer, how you been since the last time we talked to you?
Been good. Doing a lot of podcasts this week, and overall it's been good. I got one day of work on Monday, and then I'll get a nice week and a half or so off through the new year. So I am very much looking forward to that. But yeah, otherwise everything's been good.
Same. I'm remote on Monday and then off basically through the week, and then a half day next Monday. So basically a day and a half of work left before the new year. And I frankly don't know what I'm going to get done. But Ryan, how about you? Are you in winter break mode right now?
Oh, very much so. Yeah. Winter break mode has started and we'll go through the first. So then we're back on the second and third this year. Next year, they decided to give us the full 2 weeks, which is already something I'm salivating for and excited for. We're already figuring out what we're going to do with that because we'll go someplace for that. So that's going to be nice. But you guys probably didn't catch this, but did you see that Liverpool played a game today and won 6-3?
I did not. No. Were you aware of this, I assume?
Yeah, I was. I went down to Nomad in Milwaukee to watch it, but 6-3. Yeah, it was a little bit crazy. It was a little bit frantic and a little bit. And the joke was going into the game, everybody knew there was going to be goals. Nobody knew there were going to be that many goals. But to have a 9-goal game in a Premier League game, yeah,
that's crazy.
It was a lot of fun. But Liverpool is staying at the top of the table, so that's been wonderful. The Badgers looked like I really didn't get to watch much. We were doing a little finishing up our Christmas shopping, and so I watched a little bit of it during lunch. But it looks like the Badger basketball team will head into the new year on a nice win as well. So yeah,
there's that. We're into bowl season. Thankfully, some of the watching on Sunday was a lot more interesting than the college football playoffs first round. I don't know if we needed to expand to 12 teams, so we can talk about that on a different podcast. But yeah,
what happened there? Like, not one of those games was remotely interesting, and I get some of it is because there were some automatic qualifiers who really weren't among the best teams in the country that got in, and so some of that's going to happen. But good Lord. I mean, not even
a lot of that is next round too. So the next round, I feel like this is a year where we know where the 4 or 5 best teams are. So 12 teams seems a little excessive, but my favorite was basically Kirk Herbstreit, dissing Indiana for their showing against Notre Dame on Friday night. And that was the closest game of the entire weekend. So, maybe Indiana didn't do that badly. We'll see what happens there. But yeah, obviously college football watching was not great. Packers don't play until Monday night, so we don't have Paul here to talk about that. But his Packers mini pod is up on the Patreon. And a reminder for those of you who are not patrons yet, go to patreon.com/MKE Tailgate. $2 a month gets you question priority both on this podcast and on reporting as eligible. The $5 level gets you that perk plus Paul's Packers mini pods and the minor league extra with Ryan and Spencer. Ryan, how did your the 2028 Brewers draft go for you in the minor league extra?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Spencer shocked the world by taking Bryce Terang with the first overall pick. So
what?
No, he didn't.
Oh wow,
that was a joke.
That was a teaser. Yeah. You should have bought $5 just to see his rationale there.
No, the first pick was exactly who you would expect it would have been and should have been. But it got a little bit murky right away after that because. It did get a little bit murky right away after that. So we will see. I definitely, by the middle rounds there, you start to very much feel like you're just throwing darts. And by the end, it's like, oh, yeah, I probably shouldn't have left a few players that I did on the board. So, yeah. Yeah, but it was a lot of fun. We had it is really a very fun thing. We weren't able to get James Anderson back for it. The scheduling just didn't work out, but hopefully in the future we'll be able to do that because it is just a lot of fun to do that. Way better than sitting and drawing up like a 2028 roster and doing that.
Yeah. Which, if that's your thing, Baseball America exists for that reason.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that. But yeah, definitely worth checking out. $5 a month level there for both that and Paul's mini pods for what's left of the regular season, and then hopefully a deep Packers playoff run. Although they were eliminated from division contention today because the Lions just dismantled the Bears as expected. I don't know if you guys were out, but the Lions ran this crazy trick play. And it's like the Lions know they've got this sewed up. So they're just running all sorts of crazy stuff to put on tape. And they had, it's not quite a fumble rooski, but they had a fake botch snap that resulted in a tight end leak out to the end zone to Sam Laporta. And it was complete with Jahmyr Gibbs just diving on the ground like there was a fumble. So Mr. Simone Biles, I think, got caught up in that and let Sam Laporta behind him for an easy touchdown. But that was by far the most evil play design I think I've seen all year. So the Lions are having fun. Not going to catch them, obviously. The Eagles lost a wild game to the Commanders. So maybe there's, the number one seed in play. If the playoffs go through Detroit, I don't know if that's a terrible thing for the Packers.
No.
So we'll see what happens in the next couple of weeks. But yeah, just kind of a wild Sunday here while we wait for the Packers to play. But this is the Brewers podcast, as I always like to say. So let's talk about some Brewers things. This being the episode before the holidays, not a ton of news to talk about, but we do have some really good questions and early holiday present here from our friends at Baseball Prospectus. Thanks, Jonathan, for the early PECOTA projections. So we do have those to talk about. So let's just dive into that. Always fun to kind of take a first glance at the early PECOTA projections. They don't have, depth charts or division projections or anything like that quite yet. But this is our first look at what PECOTA is thinking for the next year, especially when it comes to the Brewers. And I think the number one thing looking at both the pitching and the hitting for me is depth, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's just start with the pitching. In the 50th percentile projections, the Brewers have 5 starting pitchers projected for 2 WARP or better. I think, which would point being towards a, fairly deep rotation, especially after the addition of Nestor Cortez. But that does include Brandon Woodruff being projected for about 122 innings this year, which seems on the high end to me coming off that shoulder injury. But I guess, Spencer, let's start with you. Would you take the over or under on that 122 innings for Brandon Woodruff? And how effective does he really need to be for the Brewers to maybe chase for another division title?
Yeah, I would take the under on that. I mean, that would be awesome. I would be thrilled if we get over 120 innings out of Woodruff, especially at a 3.17 ERA, which is what they had for his projection there too. But I would take the under. I just don't know what we're going to get out of Woodruff. It's possible he'll come back completely healthy, but the odds are pretty well stacked against that. That just is not the most likely outcome for him this season. I think for the Brewers to feel good and for him to feel good about the season, if you get close to triple-digit innings and he has a league average or a little better ERA, you probably feel pretty good about that from Woodruff this season. And I think that would be enough to help the Brewers quite a bit over the course of a season. I think that type of production would be super helpful, but I don't think the Brewers are relying on him being what he was prior to the injury. And I don't think fans should be expecting that. I think you're kind of setting yourself up for disappointment, and you're probably setting up Woodruff for failure in the eyes of the fans, which I always worry about a little bit, where he's going to come back and be fine, but people are kind of expecting the old version of him. And I don't really think that's fair to him coming off of this injury. So I guess that's where I would lay it. Somewhere around like a 4 ERA and close to 100 innings would be a pretty successful season for me.
Yeah, I think those are both numbers that you would aspire to, and it may not even be that good. So it basically the best thing to do with Woodruff, and we've been saying this all offseason, you, Paul, we've all been saying it, like, just have no expectations for Woodruff, because we just don't know. Shoulders are horrible injuries, and his in particular, this is not something that people have had trouble coming back from before. And so if he's able to build back up, it may even be a few years down the road, honestly. So just keep the expectations low and just be happy that he's still on the team and that you're hopefully getting something from him, and then treat it as gravy if it works out that way. But yeah, kind of taking a look at the whole picture, though, it is interesting that they do seem to have depth in the rotation in a way that Cortez really does help fill that out. They really, that was a big addition. I was a little bit surprised to see Tobias Myers only at 116 innings, because I think that's definitely on the low side for what I could see him going well in excess of that. And I know it's because he doesn't have a track record and all of that, and so that's why the projections system is going to be a little bit conservative on him. But yeah, I think that they do seem to have 4 starters and Woodruff that look pretty solid, and then there is depth behind that. So I think where they're at with the rotation, kind of looking at this, I still felt like I was still thinking there was another guy to add here, that you could go out and add somebody else to the rotation. And I guess I just don't see that as being that big a need anymore. Just kind of glancing through this and thinking, no, they seem to have depth from, DL Hall, maybe Ashby, though I think we all think Ashby's more of a reliever, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. So but with Hall being in behind there, and then all of the various young guys, Logan Henderson, Carlos Rodriguez being ahead of Henderson, it was a bit of a surprise in terms of the projected WARP, but it's all close and kind of in there.
Yeah. I think you're right to point out the Myers projection for only 116 innings, because it's not even like he hasn't done that before. He threw 138 for the Brewers last year. So, but you're right. It's always important to remember with these projection systems, if you don't have a track record, the error bars are a little bit larger, and they're not really going to project crazy inning totals year over year either. That's also why Freddie Peralta is projected for about 160 innings as well, tied with Brendan Woodruff, I should say, for the lead, or the team lead in WARP there as well, and then Aaron Savali at 2.3. But like I said, we're going to talk about other surprises and stuff like that. But I did want to mention to the bullpen, because beyond the rotation, I think I counted like a total of 19 guys have WARPs projected over replacement level, which just seems absurd to me. And like you said, once you get down to the 0.1, 0.2 level, it's sort of, a rounding error, so to speak. But it feels to me, looking at this, even without Devin Williams, this might be one of the deeper bullpens the Brewers potentially have had in recent memory, at least when you look at the amount of guys that could cycle through. Yeah, maybe the top end without Devin, we've talked about that last week a little bit, is a little shaky if you don't quite believe in Trevor McGill, but they have a ton of arms, Spencer, at their disposal that they could maybe cycle through. Whether or not they're on the 40-man is maybe a different issue, but I guess your take, Spencer, on just the amount of guys that they could maybe turn to if things go awry.
Yeah, I think depth has always been a huge plus for the bullpen in general. They tend to have a lot of depth. They try to carry MLB, at least caliber fill-ins at AAA, and then sometimes you get a little bit more out of them with a little development or a couple tweaks. They like to do that. They'll sign a few minor league free agents. You might hit on a Jared Koenig once in a while. It's just kind of that type of stuff. They do that every year, and then it gives them a little bit more depth. But they also have at the current moment, they just have a lot of prospects who are kind of on the verge of MLB, who also could help in a bullpen role, whether they're starting or in a relief role, I should say. And then on the 40-man, they've just carried a bunch of people who are kind of on the fringes. And looking at the numbers, like even Brian Hudson's projected for 0.0 on this list, and Aaron Ashby is as well. And JB Bukauskas, like I could easily see all three of them being helpful, solid relievers at the big league level this year. And Jacob Mizorowski's at -0.1. So like all those guys, even beyond the ones who are projected for positive WAR, which I am noticing now a few of them aren't even in the Brewers organization anymore, which is always funny when they first come out with these. There's always a few that are kind of fall through the cracks that way. Like Mitch White is playing in Korea this year, but yeah, I mean, it's just they carry the steps, they build the steps, and it's very intentional, and it kind of allows them to cycle through a Trevor McGill, who was a tiny trade for a player to be named later, and now I think everyone agrees is probably your opening day closer, or at least gets the first shot at it next year. So they do this on purpose. It's very intentional, and yeah, they just always have this kind of depth. And I do agree, though. I think this is getting up there with about as good of depth as we've seen, just in terms of how far down the list you can go, where it's like, okay, yeah, I could see him impacting the big league bullpen this year.
Yeah, I really do want to point out too, PECOTA loves Craig Yoho. Like, absolutely. Yes. Look at this. Craig Yoho. So you kind of mentioned that, James, didn't you mention that Trevor McGill was sort of, they're not really firm believers in him. They don't have a bad projection on him or anything, but they have him as just sort of pretty run-of-the-mill, basically he's expected to be about as good as Nick Mears is expected to be, is where they have him at. Yoho, on the other hand, we're looking at a projected ERA of 3.32, a FIP of 3.48, CFIP 82, so that is 18% better than the park-adjusted league average, DRA minus 83, so 17% better. And he is projected to be the best reliever in the bullpen, really. And they don't even have him projected for that many innings. They have Payamps
32 innings.
Yeah, they have him projected at 32, and they have Payamps at 64. And Yoho being, so they basically have Yoho being better on a inning per inning basis than anybody else in the bullpen. So that is pretty aggressive and something that you definitely like to see. Like that is something that will bring a smile to your face, because they definitely could use that. They could use Yoho, and you kind of wonder how quickly he could end up being in the big leagues this year. Like, would you be surprised if it was out of camp?
I would be, just because he's not on the 40-man, and we did see some command issues at the end of the season when he got to AAA. Like I said, a couple times throughout the offseason, I think that might have been more fatigue than anything else, but I still think they want to see him go to AAA and at least show that he can be in the zone a little bit more consistently. But I don't think like early May would surprise me if he has a good first month. I don't think they're going to want to waste bullets on him in AAA, because he's got the stuff to get big league hitters out right away. And there's no need to just kind of have that sitting in AAA when he'd be better than people who are on the opening day roster going into the season.
What's the key with him? Fastball command? Because the fastball isn't a big velocity pitch. This is not, everybody kind of focuses on the similarities with the changeup, it being very airbender-ish and all of that. But he doesn't have Devin Williams' fastball, right? Like that's
No, it's a very different fastball. He gets like 20 inches of run on his fastball, so it's a two-seam, but it's a low 90s pitch. And yeah, I think in AAA it was honestly all the pitches, and it wasn't even a matter of the walks went up a little bit. They weren't awful, but he just wasn't in the zone very much, and you have to wonder if that's going to be a problem in MLB when hitters are a little more able to just kind of pick up on the off speed. Even if they can't hit it, if they're able to lay off of it a little bit more, that's where the walks can kind of climb up on him, I think. So they'll probably just want to see him show that he can land all the pitches in the zone when they need to be a little bit more often, but it wasn't like he was missing terribly either. I don't think it'll be too big of a problem for him.
He's one too. I wouldn't be surprised once we get to spring training if he kind of gets one of those slots, midway through the spring training schedule where he's facing big league guys just to kind of gauge where he is, right? I think you're maybe right where there's just so many, and maybe we mentioned this a week or two ago, there's so many guys with one or zero options left on the 40 man, where you figure, like Nick Mears will get the first chance to fail, so to speak, or if like Jared Koenig, I know he's got more options than that, it falters, like there are guys where maybe Murph and the front office would prefer to take those guys out of camp. But I think Spencer's right in that early to mid-May, I wouldn't be surprised, especially if some other guys falter, to see Yoho up there.
Yeah.
It was interesting to see Abner Uribe projected for 64 innings. That is a number I would very heavily bet the under on, but and still projecting there to be the walk issues, but the strikeouts bouncing back a little bit, because that was an issue before he got hurt last year, was the strikeouts were down from where they had been. But he seems like a guy, if there's anybody who could like bounce back and become a real dominator in the bullpen, that seems like as good a bet as you're going to find. So it'll be interesting to see. I want to see him, if he's back to missing bats the way he was previous to last year. So that's one to watch as well.
Yeah. And I was going to ask next, I guess, for both of you, what kind of jumps off the page outside of what I mentioned already in terms of, projections or guys who maybe PECOTA thinks could produce more than expected? We don't want to give the whole thing away because BP deserves your subscriptions for this as well. But Spencer, anything else in this that jumps out to you outside of maybe Uribe or some of the guys we talked about already?
Just how similar they kind of view Savali and Cortez, I think is interesting to me. And on the whole, Cortez, Peralta, and Savali and Myers are all very similar in terms of like the raw production that they're expecting from them. I think that's probably about what I would think too. I'm a little surprised that's what the numbers spit out after all of it. I kind of thought Freddie might get a little boost just because of the strikeouts and everything else that he brings to the table. But otherwise, Yoho was really going to be the one I was going to point out here. I think the fact that they view him that highly based off of really only a small sample in AAA as well. Most of it came from lower levels. So that says a lot about what he was doing last year.
Yeah, I would point to, on the opposite side of that, is Jacob Mizorowski, who they do not have much faith in. They have him projected for a 50 innings, which seems to be like a default setting. They have a bunch of guys here that are just like 50.
For the 50th percentile, for sure, yeah.
Yeah, like where they just kind of put that there. Yeah, but it's, I mean, a 1.46 whip, an ERA of almost 5, 5.5 walks per 9. Yeah, they don't see it with Miz in terms of what he could do this year, which I kind of get based on the fact that like he still was having command issues at the end of last season, which is why I think we didn't end up seeing him, like both him and Yoho. So they're not big believers. The system is not a big believer in Mizorowski. So at this point, to be clear, also Aaron Ashby. Lower than I was like, I had to keep scrolling and scrolling for Ashby. And they also, again, they see too many walks.
Yeah. He was also just pretty bad in AAA for most of the season. And then he just figured it out right at the end. So,
yeah. And that one really does stand out as like the system is not going to be as good at figuring some of this stuff out as people are at this point, because pitchers are just so dependent on that. It's not going to catch that, all of a sudden his arm action was suddenly better and he felt like he had finally sort of recovered from the surgery, and that happened boom one day, and then he was a different pitcher from then on out. The system isn't really going to read that. They're not going to see that. So it's not going to catch sort of in-season improvements that way. One of the downfalls of a system like PECOTA.
Yeah, and it looks like they were kind of running it as Ashby as a swingman. So they got him for 33 games, but 10 starts, 4 quality starts, whatever, for 64 and 2/3 innings. Like you said, the overall numbers not fantastic, but maybe out of the bullpen a little bit better, considering I always like looking at the comps, right? Because this is where, whether it's Jonathan or Dan Zaborski with Zips has a little fun, but Aaron Ashby's comps are Justice Sheffield, Brad Hand, and Zach Britton. So there's a couple of good lefty relievers, even like shutdown lefty relievers there on the back end. So it kind of depends on how you look at him. I don't know if I would trust him as a starter at this point either. Spencer, do you think that ship's kind of sailed at this point, or what do you think?
I do. And I always thought before the injury, I thought he could start long term, but I just don't think he can coming off the injury. He was trying to do it in AAA. The move to the pen is what immediately sparked his just figuring everything out. I don't see any reason to move him back to the rotation. I mean, I'm all for let's put him in spring, stretch him out, and if he's going great, why not? But I have strong doubts that it would actually work.
Yeah. I guess speaking of the comps, did y'all catch who Robert Gosser's top comp was? He's not going to pitch much this year, but it's Blake Snell.
Yeah,
I'd take that. Yeah,
but that was a name that stood out to me. Nestor Cortez having a Jim Cat comp.
Oh, yeah, that was good too. Yeah.
Woodruff,
Omar Dahl.
Yeah,
back in the day, Omar Dahl for Nestor Cortez as well. But yeah, Woodruff's man.
Woodruff's just makes me sad because it's like this was kind of the path he was on. He was on a path to. They have Adam Wainwright, Steven Strasburg, and Bob Gibson, and so it's just like he was on a path like that, and now with the crushing shoulder injury, everything is in flux, and you think that those sorts of long-term outcomes seem pretty wishful thinking at this point, which is just it's just rough.
Yeah, that Strauss comp hits a little differently when you look at how that career ended as well. Yes. Freddie Peralta, Bobby Witt Sr., AJ Burnett, which I could kind of see. He's kind of AJ Burnett-y and tons of strikeouts, but you don't know on any given night where the command's going to be. So that's nice as well. But yeah, it definitely worth a look too if you have access to these early spreadsheets as well. Abner Uribe's number one comp is Philippe Aumont, which I loved him as a prospect just back in the day because I wanted a French Canadian to be awesome, and that just did not work out at all. All right, let's look at the hitters because, again, it seems like depth is the name of the game here. Looking at the 50th percentile projections, obviously, William Contreras, the best bat remaining after Willy Adames moves on. He's projected for about 3.6 WARP and a DRC plus of 119. Christian Yelich is second with 2.8 WARP and a 115 DRC plus. Importantly, noting that PECOTA is only projecting him for 128 games. So, as Paul would like to mention, he'll be good for a month, and then let's see what happens after that. But it at least looks like PECOTA is starting to, factor in his lack of availability there, but still second best bat on the team. I counted 9 different Brewers projected for at least 1 WARP, but admittedly, as you guys noted with the pictures, I didn't look too closely to see who's still in the organization or not. But it looks like, again, at least a full starting lineup, Ryan, of above replacement player or replacement level players. So I guess, how do you feel about the offensive projections and what catches your eye here?
Yeah, this is pretty standard. This is how the Brewers build their rosters, is through depth and through having a good lineup top to bottom and trying to avoid holes. That is the name of the game here. That is what they do. And I think this kind of shows that they've already sort of established that they have the buy-in on that. Now, there are certain things I would nitpick with here. Like, they have Oliver Dunn at 1.1 WARP, and that is assuming a lot of playing time that I don't necessarily know that he's going to get to. Though, as the roster is structured today, I guess you would have to presume he's going to get a lot of playing time. And as the guys at Baseball Prospectus are always pointing out, every projection is basically a playing time projection. That's kind of the name of the game here. So you have to, everything starts at that point with having to figure out like how much do you think this player is actually going to play, and then you sort of work from that point backwards. But yeah, this is all just very familiar. This is new Brewers, same as the old Brewers. This is just what they do, how they build things up, and you hope, and you have to kind of cross your fingers here that you have some guys who are able to spike. And I think there's a pretty clear line drawn here between the top three guys, which is Contreras, Yelich, and Chourio. And then starting with the next group of guys, it's Ortiz, Turang, and Frelick. I think you could draw a pretty hard line right between Chourio and Ortiz there and say, yeah, like that top three group is going to need to do a lot of carrying because that is really the strength of the team. Now, of course, you could kind of look at that and go, well, at least one of them is playing up the middle in terms of William Contreras is playing up the middle, but Chourio and Yelich now are corner players, and really Yelich, I think we're going to see a lot at DH, right? That seems to be a pretty reasonable inference at this point.
That's my guess, yeah.
Yeah, we're going to see him a lot at DH. So that part of it, like, obviously there's still work to be done from that perspective, but yeah, it really is sort of the same thing that we've seen from them for a while, which is to build through depth and to have your projected 10th, 11th, 12th players on the depth chart contributing and adding a lot of value. Blake Perkins is down there at, I think he's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He's the 10th player on the list, and he's projected for basically a win. He's at 0.9. So they are projecting just, sort of a deep, useful team the way that we're just used to seeing.
Yeah, agreed. There's the only thing that stands out to me is like, it's always funny to me. It feels like the 50th percentile for pitchers is always a lot friendlier than the 50th percentile for hitters, just in like the raw numbers. When you look at them,
Sure.
like OPS compared to ERA, the OPSs for the Brewers on their 50th percentile are barely scratching like mid 600s and low 700s. But for pitchers, you're getting mid 3 ERAs. And it's like, I don't know how that always is weird to me. But yeah, I think, like Ryan said, it's a pretty clear top three. And then after that, it's who's going to step up this year, who's going to kind of bring maybe a little bit more power in certain spots and all of that. But it is interesting to see Oliver Dunn up there. I can tell they love his defense. I like Oliver Dunn. I've said it before. To me, the difference between Oliver Dunn and Garrett Mitchell is in profile. It's basically just a couple of years of age. Like, they're both swing and miss guys who hit the ball hard, hit it on the ground a little bit too much, and play good defense, and are fast and like all of that. So I always look at them and I'm like, man, people love Mitchell and hate Dunn, but for me, it's like, I don't think they're that different. But if he ends up being the third baseman, I'd be surprised if he's not worth one WAR, but I don't think he's going to be anything too special. So yeah, you're hoping he doesn't end up being the main guy there. And yeah, otherwise it is a little interesting. I think Perkins probably just gets knocked a little bit for the lack of playing time that they're expecting, but the defense is so good that when he gets in, Ward loves him on every site because he just racks it up defensively so quickly. So yeah, it'll be interesting. The position stuff is always super interesting to me. I'm always a little confused by it, honestly. So we'll see how it plays out.
Yeah, there's some weird stuff too. I'm looking at Rhys Hoskins. There's like a disconnect here. They have him hitting 209, 292, 386, which would be considerably worse than he was last year in terms of those numbers. And giving 1.6 wins above replacement. How on earth would that even be possible? Like that part I don't get at all, because his defense is atrocious, like legitimately atrocious, and he's adding no positional value because it's at first base /DH. So how on earth could he possibly, like, that's a weird disconnect I just don't get. Like, that doesn't seem to make any sense. 21 home runs for him seems like it could be, I mean, that feels like it's in the sweet spot of what I would sort of expect. But boy, yeah, I don't get that warp projection at all, because this year I got to go look at it. What was his warp this year? You guys talk. I got to go figure this out.
I would be surprised if it was in the positive. We'll see. But yeah, let's move on. Jackson Chourio. You guys mentioned clear top three. Chourio's the number 3, even though he'll be only 21 years old this year. His 50th percentile projections have him finishing third on the team in warp with 2.4 and a rather pedestrian line. But still a DRC plus of 103, which again, considering he's 21, would be excellent. But I don't know. I feel like a lot of people are expecting a little bit more here with him, which now I think we're not on a dangerous path, but maybe temper expectations path, because let's just jump to Patreon, because JVT has a question about this. It was the second question JVT sent in, but I'm going to take it first because it just works with the flow of this show. So JVT is asking, I feel like we're not talking enough about Jackson Chourio this offseason. He's the Brewers' Giannis or Love. He's arrived and is calling his shots in his age 20 season. Can you give me a few minutes of airtime on what you expect from him next season? In parentheses, 30-30 incoming, and what his best single season could look like as a Brewer. Holidays, gentlemen. Thank you for all the Brewers coverage. So, Spencer, not to rain on JVT's parade, but 30-30 at age 21 would again be historic, which, you know, he's been doing historic things, but PECOTA doesn't see that. I guess, what do you see?
Yeah, that was one of the ones I was talking about when I said I don't really get some of the projections. A 675 OPS is what they are projecting with the 50%.
That's low.
Like,
that's
if
low.
that happens, I'm going to have concerns. Like, that would be a problem. I think 30-30 is probably aggressive, but at the same time, he got to 2020 with basically a half season of playing well. So I guess I can't say I would completely rule it out. I think another 2020-ish season with like a mid 700s to upper 700s OPS is probably what I'm looking at as like a reasonable, I don't even want to say expectation, but like something I could see as being pretty feasible for him next season. But probably just with a little bit less of a low point to start the year and then less of a high point in the middle, and to finish the season, it would just be more of a steady ride to the final line, I guess. But I'm not the guy to ask on tempering expectations for him, because I very much believe he could potentially have that type of season next year, and it just would not shock me that much.
Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all to see him pop something in the 900s, because that was essentially what he was after June 1st. Like, that was essentially the last 4 months of the season, what he was doing. He was right up in that neighborhood. So it wouldn't surprise me. It also wouldn't surprise me to see him have something of a sophomore slump, go through some adjustment period. Pitchers are going to really be focusing on him now. Every team in the division and they're all going to be focusing on him, because he is the guy that you have to get out in this lineup. It's going to, him and Yelich are the guys that you're going to have to plan around. So he's going to be attacked in that perspective. So yeah, there's wide error bars on this because he is so young. But yeah, it is guys that are this talented and show what he showed at the age he showed it, sort of write their own rules too. So you just sort of sit back. This is one of those where it's just fun to be a sports fan and be like, I don't know. He could be absolutely amazing, and we could be looking at a breakout MVP type season from him this year. Like, honestly, it shouldn't surprise anybody if that happens. But because of the age and just because of where we're at, there are the wide error bars, which that's part of the deal with having somebody who's this talented, because the heights he can get to, and just the way things can sometimes go wrong for a player over the course of a season. All that stuff is obviously in play. I do want to just go back real quick because I looked it up, and Rhys Hoskins last year hit 214, 303, 419. So better than what he's projected to in all three categories this year on PECOTA.
God.
And he had a 0.3 warp. So how is he supposed to be less? I don't understand this at all. How is he supposed to be less of a hitter this year decrease in hitting and like make a jump from 0.03 or sorry 0.3 to 1.6. Something is wacky with that projection. I don't get that at all. But anyways, Jackson Chourio is like, he's right. Like, he is to the Brewers what Giannis, obviously what Giannis was when he was young, and like what Jordan Love. There's actually a pretty good parallel, I think, to be drawn between what Chourio did in last year and what we saw from Jordan Love in his first year as a starter in 2023,
Second
right?
half. Yeah.
Because he did have struggles, and there was real, like, Paul and the guys on RAE were legitimately saying, oh, well, it doesn't look like he's going to be that good. And then it clicked and everything came together for him in the stretch run, like the second half of that season. So yeah, it was like, obviously it's a little bit different with Chourio because Love was doing this having sat on the bench for 3 years and having developed up, and Chourio was doing it at an insanely young age. But there's some comparables to be drawn there, I think.
Yeah, it's just really hard to project a guy like this, right? Because you're looking at something that hasn't really been done before. So I can appreciate the Giannis comparison because, again, he was extremely raw first 2-3 years, right? And then he just friggin' exploded. And even if you look at PECOTA's 90th percentile projections, I feel like some people might feel like it's kind of pedestrian. 90th percentile is 253, 301, 422 for Chourio with 20 home runs and 3.5 warp. And like, that seems maybe likely. And that's the 90th percentile projection, which is wild. So you can see why his comps are Ronald Acuna Jr., Mike Trout, and the disappointing one is Justin Upton, which, you know, similarly came up at 20 years old and was quickly an all-star. Yes, he flamed out post 30. We talked about this in our group chat offline a little bit. Those Angels contracts, man, will kill you every single time. But you know, like, if that's the floor for Jackson Chourio, that seems pretty solid. So I don't know. I guess before we move on, any other random thoughts, musings about the hitting projections here? Spencer's shaking his head. I think we kind of covered the basics of it. It's depth. The top three are pretty clear. I don't know. I don't know if we can expect any other breakouts beyond, you know, Jackson Chourio just breaking PECOTA. So we'll see. And we'll be kind here. This is the first run of PECOTA. Things change over the winter. Things will look a little bit different in February when we look at these again, when we do our season previews. But always fun to kind of look at these in December as well, to kind of tide us over into the new year as well. I guess really quick before we get to other Patreon questions this week, some more news items. The Brewers weren't completely quiet. They did add a coach that replaced Quentin Berry at first base, who you may remember jumped ship and joined Craig Counsell in Chicago. So instead, now we will have Julio Bourbon, I should say, similar to Q Berry, you know, player. As a player, he was something of a stolen base specialist. So, you know, you have a similar skill set there. He'll presumably be in charge of that element again. Now, I know Quentin Berry also helped with the outfield defense and such. I guess, do you expect responsibilities to change much, or what can we expect here?
No, I think you kind of pointed it out. He had a very similar type of career path as Quentin Berry did. He was a bit of a base stealing specialist at times. He played outfield, obviously. He was a good athlete. I'm imagining it'll be a very similar role. I'm guessing they were looking for somebody who was a similar type of person to Quentin Berry, just overall, and kind of the way he does things. And it feels like I mean, I don't know a ton about him. I know he's with the Twins organization as a coach the last couple of years. And I looked at his Twitter account, and funny enough, when he's a Tennessee guy, he was drafted out of Tennessee. When Blake Burke got drafted by the Brewers, he tagged Burke and was like, "Can't wait for you to get to work with my guy, Quentin Berry in Milwaukee." And now he might be working with him himself. So I don't think Blake Burke will be stealing many bases if he does make it to the majors, but either way, Bourbon, it just feels like they found a similar person to Barry. We don't know if he'll be as good at the job as he was, but my guess is it won't be a super noticeable difference because they likely operate pretty similarly just overall.
Yep, I don't really have anything to add to that. It just seems like he was pulled right out of central casting for this. Interesting. I have some vague memory of my brother and his friend being obsessed with him when he was on the Cubs in the 2010-ish era. My brother and his friend, both Cubs fans. And so I remember them being obsessed with him, but I think that might have just been his name. So I'm going to have to ask him about that when I see him for the holidays this week. But it just seems like a fit. He's going to do what it'd be asked to do what Quentin Berry did.
Julio Bourbon was the number 19 overall prospect in Baseball America in 2007. One of those super hyped Rangers prospects that never really turned out from that era. So interesting note as well. Also, Brewers added a 29-year-old lefty named Bruce Zimmerman on a minor league contract with a camp invite. He is a pitcher who features, again, high 80s, low 90s fastball and a career walk rate of 5.2%. Stop me if you heard that one before. Spencer, is this spaghetti or is there something in his pitch arsenal the Brewers can maybe accentuate?
Yeah, it is spaghetti, but it's at the same time, he does have 3 breaking or off speed pitches that are all pretty decent. His changeup was his most used pitch in AAA last year, had a whiff rate of 35%. His curveball was used quite a bit. It had a 38% whiff rate, and his slider was over 30% as well. So, and he uses them all quite a bit. So the thing with him is his fastballs have always gotten crushed. I mean, crushed, especially at the big league level, but even in AAA. Jack actually found, when we were talking about him on our podcast, a video of him working with tread this offseason, and his 2-seam, which has sat around like 13 inches of horizontal break, which is pretty dead zone. It's not a very good shape. It's been up to 21, sitting in like the closer to 20 range while working with tread. So that makes it interesting at the level of like, oh, maybe he's got a fastball that can at least play now. And the off-speed pitches already work without a good fastball. So it's at least worth keeping an eye on, but he's kind of just depth, like we talked about when we were talking about the pitchers. It's another guy that they know he spent a decent amount of time in MLB. They know if they have to bring him up, worst case scenario, he's not going to have the moment get too big for him. He'll be able to handle it. He'll throw strikes. It might play well enough with our defense behind him to make it work. But best case scenario, maybe you figured something out with the fastball, and now all 3 of those off-speed pitches play up enough, and he could actually be helpful if he comes up. So just one of those situations where there's really no risk here, but it's at least somewhat interesting that he seems to know that the fastball is a problem and he's trying to figure something out with it.
Yeah, so here's my question for you on this, Spencer. So rank him. Obviously, I think Wolfram is above this group of guys, right? Like, okay. But let's then put it into context. So you have Zimmerman, you have Connor Thomas, and you have Thomas Pannone. All are lefties, all seem to be a little bit more of the junk baller variety than Wolfram, who actually does, run it up to 96. How would you rank those 3?
I would put Connor Thomas at the top, Zimmerman second, and Pannone third for me. Just in terms of like, I think all 3 could hold their own at the MLB level, but in terms of like, could they actually help the Brewers if they were absolutely needed to? I would put them in that order.
Okay. Yeah, the most interesting thing you said there to me was that they seem to be watching. The Brewers are watching and seeing what's going on at these facilities that aren't affiliated with Major League Baseball and seeing what's going on. And they said, oh, okay, there seems to be an improvement here. Let's go ahead and sign this guy and give it a shot. And that is a big part of what's the game is these days, right? That's just the way it is now is guys going and doing off-season improvements and then getting so tread is basically something along the lines of like what's the Kyle Bodie? What's his old
Driveline?
Oh, Driveline. Yeah. Similar
it's
to
a
that.
little less weighted ball focused, but it's very similar in terms of like pitch shapes and working on different pitches and all of that stuff. But yeah, I mean, even going back to when they signed Colin Ray the second time, he had just added a sweeper at Driveline that offseason. So I think the Brewers do they're probably watching tweets like the rest of us and just seeing like, oh, that's interesting, because they wouldn't have that knowledge offhand, but see something like that and go, oh, okay, if he can do that, then maybe he's interesting with what he already had otherwise. So it is kind of funny thinking about it, like some random guy sitting in the Brewers front office just going like, oh, Tread tweeted about Bruce Zimmerman. Maybe we should give him a look.
Yeah, why not?
It's probably a good idea to have connections, people in your organization who are talking to people that work at Tread, that work at Driveline, that work at all these various places, to keep that, to have phone calls be placed, or I suppose text messages these days, because who makes phone calls other than people my age and older?
Who's call weirdos? Yeah. All right. Should we do questions? Let's do questions. Price throws in next up on the Patreon. Patreon.com/MKE tailgates. Last season, you guys willed the Brewers into getting Rhys Hoskins. Who would be this is the best feasible dude for us, and we should go get him for 2025? Ryan, I'm going to hang the responsibility of Rhys Hoskins on you. Spencer, I feel like I'm jumping on your bandwagon with Ryan McMahon. Spencer, anybody catch your eye here that they should add?
Yeah, I do enjoy McMahon as a trade guy. I think of the free agents out there that I think might end up having to take somewhat of like a prove-it deal, Gleyber Torres and Ha-Seong Kim kind of stand out to me as two pretty good options. Torres, you probably don't necessarily want him at third, but I don't think it really matters because he's not going to play great defense at second or third. But he does add power to the lineup, and I do think that is something the Brewers could use. And I know we have a question about that coming up soon, so I won't go too deep into that. But and then Ha-Seong Kim, on the other hand, he has some pop, but he does fit the really good defense that the Brewers like to have on the infield. And I think he could probably play third, and then you can do what we've kind of talked about wanting to do all offseason with Ortiz to short and Terang to second. I have no idea what their markets actually look like, but we're just kind of getting to that point in the offseason where guys like that, you have to wonder if they're going to have to take more of a prove it type of deal. So those are two that I would watch.
Yeah, couple things here. So first off, I was not the only one. Paul was also very on the Hoskins thing, as was JR. Like, I think you were.
I shouldn't hang that albatross on you. We were all in agreement. That was awesome. Yes,
and it hasn't worked out great. And we should mention that a guy that the Brewers were interested in and may have even been trying to move Hoskins to open up space for did sign with the Yankees. Paul Goldschmidt signed for 1 year, $12.5 million. And so you look at that, and then you were saying Carlos Santana got something sort of in that neighborhood as well.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, Hoskins at 18 feels like it's an overpay for an underperform, but we just have to hope that he can have a bounce back season this year, the way that Jesse Winker did, the second year coming off of surgery and all of that. So, but I was gonna say Ha-Seong Kim, who I did a little talk about at the end of last week's episode, trying to will that into existence. Yep. But Ha-Seong Kim, if he ends up on the Brewers, which is a long shot, because a lot of people are looking at Ha-Seong Kim going, that could be very useful to us right now for all the reasons that you guys stated. But if he ends up on the Brewers, that's something that's going to happen at like the end of January, not like he's going to have to stay on the market and stay on the market and stay on the market for it to get to that point. And there is something that I wanted to bring up here because we talked about it a little bit in our group chat this week, and this was from Effectively Wild is where I heard it because I'm not a subscriber, but it's coming from the Joe Sheehan newsletter. And he was talking about the fact that, because I've said on here, like I was expecting a very down market this year. I was expecting there not to be a lot of spending because of one of the big reasons being all the TV deals being so in flux and there being a lot of teams that are dealing with that. And so far we've obviously seen a very hot market, but the reality is that hot market basically just extends to like 10 teams in the game, and the other essentially 20 teams and 19, 20 teams or whatever have spent very little. And the teams that have been taken over by MLB in terms of their TV streaming, have spent almost nothing. I mean, have spent very, very little on the free agent market, period. Almost all of that money was Cleveland and that they gave to Shane Bieber. Because I think that was like 36. I'm trying to find this back in our group chat here because I put it in there. I wanted to talk about it. And having trouble finding it. But yeah, the numbers on it are just kind of staggering, that the spending being done this winter is really being done by the teams that have firm, good TV deals, which is obviously highly correlated to them being in big markets. Like the teams that can afford, and it made sense for them to create their own RSNs, those are almost all big market teams. So that's why they have that ability and that flexibility. So it is just kind of frustrating to realize that that's what's going on. But ultimately, I think we're gonna. At this point, we've seen a slowdown in the market. We've seen, I think, the big spenders have all kind of gone out and shot their biggest shots that they're going to shoot for the most part. I guess you still have Corbin Burns out there, but
Right.
a lot of the top guys are kind of done. Now we're going to see what the market sort of settles into over the month of, well, I'm sure there will be some transactions over the holidays here, but then really once we get into January, where are the bargains? Where can you actually find bargains, and where are the Brewers going to choose to make their play?
Next, we have a couple of questions from Mark Podscarby. First, asking, last year the Brewers hit 177 home runs. Steamer currently has them projected to hit 175 home runs. Are we too worried about needing to add power to the lineup? I don't know. Again, going back to like Churio, he could hit anywhere between like 15 and 30, and a lot of those problems go away. But Spencer, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there is a very real possibility that some of the younger guys will add some power to their game and help replace some of the Adames power. But I guess my argument would be that I don't think the Brewers had enough power last year. So fighting to
Right,
get back to that number doesn't necessarily, in my mind, that's not really what we would be shooting for. I'd like to see a little bit more power out of the lineup if possible. The Brewers were 17th in home runs last year. Only two teams that made the playoffs were lower than them, and that was the Royals with 170 and the Tigers with 162. It's very hard to win in the playoffs without power. It's hard to score as many runs as the Brewers did last year, and to their credit, they got it done. But I looked up some numbers, and last year they were 29th in solo homers. That's obviously it's pretty low. They were 6th in two-run homers.
A lot of 3-run and grand slams, right?
Yeah, they were
That's
9th
where they
in
made them.
3 runs, and then they were 2nd in grand slams. So the percentage of homers that were solo were 45%, which was the lowest in all of baseball. The sequencing was crazy good for the Brewers last year, which meant they did end up scoring quite a few runs with the homers that they hit. It feels tough to rely on that to continue to get that type of output. So for me, I think they need to add more power than they had last year. And I also don't know. I mean, I looked at the Steamer projections. All of them feel reasonably possible. Like Churio's at 28, Reese is at 26, Contreras at 25, Yelich at 18, Mitchell at 15, Ortiz at 13, and Terang at 10 are when it starts to get a little iffy. And they also have Jake Bauers hitting 6 in their projection for the 175. So I don't know. To me, I don't buy that this current team even gets to that point. And I do think, like we said, I mean, Churio could see a jump. I could see Mitchell and Ortiz having a little jump from where they're projected, but that feels about right. Unless William Contreras starts hitting it in the air more, I don't think we're getting past 25. In fact, he hasn't gotten to 25 yet in his 2 years with the Brewers. And then Reese at 26 is about what he had this year, and that feels about what I would expect. I could see him having more just because he could have a better season. I'm kind of expecting a better season overall, but the homers weren't really the problem for him. It was everything else last year. So I don't know. I still think they need to add power. I get it. Like the Brewers have a lot of speed. They have a lot of different ways to create runs, but I don't buy that they can actually score that many runs without actually having some more power in the lineup.
Yeah, I think this is a good shout from Mark. The idea here that they're closer to what they were last year than I think what you would think on the surface. Okay, Willie Adames is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Jake Bauers is gone. They're closer to the number than what you might think on the surface, because people always just like subtract what's being lost from the roster, especially when a player like Adames leaves. So this shows that they have some wiggle room here to they're better than you might think on the surface. But I agree with everything you said. Their sequencing was great. More on that in a minute. The sequencing was awesome, and you can't count on that to continue. And they needed to hit for more power than they did last year anyway. So you would like to see them figure out a way to bring in, and I think that this is probably something that they are focusing on, is trying to figure out a way to get some guys who have the capability to hit some dingers on the roster this offseason. Like they're probably looking at that quite closely and trying to do that. And I think Kim hit like 17 home runs last year, right? So he wouldn't.
Yeah, he's not bad.
Right. Like he actually does. And that was playing in San Diego. So there's actually some real power there. So he would help on this front quite a bit, I would think. That would be a positive there. But yeah, I wanted to go back to the point though about the sequencing, which is an interesting one. I've brought this up before and I want to reiterate. Yes, the Brewers sequencing was really good last year, but the Brewers sequencing has been really good for 3 years running now. They have been a much better team hitting with runners in scoring position than they have been overall in 2022, 2023, and 2024. This has been a consistent theme with this team, and I still don't know what to make of it. I don't know if this is an all-time fluke where they just had this thing stack up for them this way, or if they have unlocked something, if they have figured something out, if they have some sort of secret sauce here that is making them hit better with runners in scoring position. Because it is, at this point, I have a real hard time believing it's a statistical fluke that they did it to the extent that they did it the last 3 seasons. It's really, really noticeable that they've been just a much better team hitting with runners in scoring position than they have overall. So I don't know. That is something worth watching. I kind of feel like they're due for a year where the BABIP, or not the BABIP Gremlins, where the RISP Gremlins get them for a full season. Maybe that finally happens here, but yeah, it's something definitely to watch, because the Brewers have been pretty reliably good with runners in scoring position for a while now. So it's worth watching.
Shouts to the guy Christian Yelich always looks at in the outfield. All right. Martin Scarpy's second question. I see a lot of people saying they don't see a path for Tyler Black, but to me, it seems the logical path is for him to take on the Jake Bauers role next season before transitioning to the full-time first baseman in 2026 if he performs well in 2025. Am I missing something? Spencer, real quick, any corollaries between Tyler Black and Jake Bauers?
Yeah, I get it. I really do. I understand why people think this. I really don't know that people fully grasp how bad defensively he was at first base last year.
Sure.
I have said that I think Rhys Hoskins is one of the worst first basemen I've ever seen defensively, and I would rather put Rhys Hoskins at first base than Tyler Black based on what I saw last year, and that's bad. Like, it's really bad. And the other part of that is you don't really want to have the other first baseman be somebody that you can't ever put in to at least like shore up the defense, or when Rhys is DHing to play first base, because you're actually downgrading defensively. He might figure it out this offseason. I hope he does. But for me, no matter what Ron Washington tries to tell us in Moneyball, first base is not that hard. It's just not. It's something you should be able to pick up. You should be able to pick it up pretty quickly. And if you don't even show signs of it, I mean, in Nashville, he was straight up dropping balls and missing throws. Like it's really bad. So I think he's an outfielder long-term still. I just don't see it on the infield at all. And for me, that's why it becomes so hard to fit him into the roster.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, we are the ones saying this. He says he sees a lot of people. That's us. That's me and Spencer. We're the ones saying that. And yeah, it's also just a very different shape of production, right? Because Bauers was like power and discipline, and that was it. Black is not power like that. You're not getting raw power from him. So the shape of the production would be different. Though I could see him on the hitting side being a better hitter than what Jake Bauers was last year. I have no problem imagining that from Tyler Black. the problem again is the defense, and he's going to have to
Yeah.
actually be good at it. I don't know. The Tyler Black thing is just it is a mystery wrapped inside of a riddle inside of an enigma. I mean, it just Black is Tyler Black is a black box. That's what we're going with.
Could be anything. All right, JVT, another question this week writing, shout out to Jake McKibben for his article on Garrett Mitchell's problem with the high fastball. Can Mitchell fix his swing path and risk this offseason? And or how would you expect he is approaching this problem in his swing this offseason in general? So this was a post Jake made on Brewer Fanatic. So I guess it's not unusual, Spencer, for batters these days to struggle with the high fastball. But, as we've referenced a couple of times, Mitchell's contact rate is not great. So I guess, is it worth the trade-off here?
Yeah. So, I mean, the thing with Mitchell is that his contact rate on high fastballs is an outlier for how bad it is, how low it is. There's almost nobody that compares to him in that regard in MLB. Jack and I talked about it mid-season at one point, but it was like, yeah, Keston Hiura is quite a bit better in the numbers on high fastballs, and like that's concerning.
I just did like a head desk, not even a face palm right now, but like a full head desk when you said that. Okay, go on.
The good news for me is that he apparently was well aware of it. I know on the broadcast when he hit a homer off a high fastball, it was like his one hit off of a high fastball all season was a home run near the end of the season. And the broadcast talked about how him and Connor Dawson had been working on it like constantly the last few weeks. I guess to me, that was one, he started showing at least a little bit of a sign. He was actually starting to foul them off more often at the end of the season too, which at one point he wasn't even doing that. He was just straight whiffing on them or taking them at the top of the zone. So I think he was getting a little closer. As Jake pointed out in his article, like the bat speed he showed at times at the end of the season was unreal. Like it was elite plus bat speed. That helps. It can help you get to a pitch up there. But he does have the type of swing that it's going to be a little bit more difficult for him to get to that. I guess my only hope here is that he was well aware of it. He started showing a little bit of progress. And now I'm guessing in the offseason, he's probably got a pitching machine that has riding fastballs set up that are coming in right at the top of the zone. And he's just training it. And it is something that like you can train it, especially if you're fully aware of it and cognizant of it being a problem. But the concern then becomes, do you change your swing to try and be able to do that? And then does it let you perform the same against the other pitches? And that's what I guess we'll probably find out. I kind of have a feeling he might be a little better against them this year. And then my concern would be, but is he going to chop everything into the ground that's at the bottom of the zone now because he's kind of trained his path to be a little higher? So it's more wait and see for me, but that's how I would expect it to be being trained, is just pounding him with high fastballs from a machine that has high spin.
Yeah, I'm going to quote Spencer back at him right now from another podcast from before, which is basically what you're hoping here from Mitchell is that he can not make this a strength of his game, that he become a good hitter against these high fastballs, but just to be able to spoil some of them, just to be able to make it less of a hole in his swing, to be able to occasionally put one in play, something that's useful, but really just to be able to spoil them off and do that would be a big thing. But like you said, the concern is if you reset your swing to accomplish that, what are you giving up on the other end? I think there's a lot of people that think that like, well, no, you can have multiple different swings. You can have, and I guess to a certain extent that's true. You can kind of have multiple different swings. Players not every swing is the same for every player, but it's a lot harder to be flexible on that, especially against 90 something mile an hour pitching and breaking stuff that's, absolutely insane in the high 80s, even the low 90s. Like, to do that against that kind of stuff, to be able to adjust your swing and be able to do that stuff and to recognize what's coming and all of those sorts of things and do that is a hell of a lot harder than I think your average fan that just gets upset at, like, why can't you just lay off that pitch? Like, it's a hell of a lot harder than I think people realize.
Yeah. Jake's article definitely worth seeking out if you want to Google that. A good look at that. Yeah, I would be worried that Mitchell's found a loft in his swing that has worked to produce more
Yep.
home run power than we maybe anticipated, and that's the trade-off, right? But definitely worth seeking out Jake's article there on Brewer Fanatic as well. Luke Roy Suitcase question this week asking, what are your 3 favorite Brewers memories from the 2024 season? What are the things from this team that we will still remember 30 years from now? So, that last one's kind of tricky. I guess you're thinking more like signature moments, if you want to call it that. I don't know if I could even think of 3 off the top of my head. Spencer, what do you think?
Yeah, for the remembering them 30 years down the line, I mean, for me, it's probably the Bowers and Frelick back-to-back, even though it happened when it happened. I don't think I will ever forget those 2 in particular going back to back to take the lead in a playoff game, despite what happened after it. The Frelick home run robbery to end a game, I feel like people always remember that type of play. And then it's more of a stretch, but I think the run of grand slams where they were just hitting them every game for a week and a half is probably something people won't really forget. So that's what I would say. And then for me, my favorite memory was actually just being in Minnesota. And I thought Jackson Chourio kind of had his coming out party. That's 2-game series where he was doing everything in that series. So that's one of my personal favorites. But yeah, for memories, I would go with the other 3.
Yeah, I would kind of echo those things. Those were some of the first things that popped up in my mind. One that was ranked very highly, I don't know if you guys saw any on MLB Network. They had the top 100 plays of the year. And the Brewers were on there a bunch of times, actually. It was a number of times, I think 5 or 6 of them. And I believe the highest ranked one that they had on there was number 20 for Jackson Chourio getting his 20th home run at the age of 20. So they made that 20. And that was the Oppo shot at Oracle Park in San Francisco, which was bonkers. Which is bonkers because the number of opposite field home runs that have ever, like, right-handed batters hitting one to right field in Oracle Park in the history of that park, which is now well over 20 years at this point, is 2 digits. It's not even triple digits at this point. Right-handed batters do not hit Oppo home runs at that park, and he backspun that thing the hell out of there and showed really, really good power. And I just remember when we were talking, James Anderson, when we were talking about Chourio real early on, he said the thing that he saw that was the most impressive was him taking the ball and hitting it hard the other way. Because when kids are doing that at 18 years old, when you're hitting the ball hard the other way, it really stands out. And then the first time I saw him in person was at a Timber Rattlers game, like the week that he got called up, and he hit one to the deepest part of the park, but it was to right center, and it ended up, the outfielder ended up getting under it, but like it would have been out of it would have been out of Miller Park easily, or out of AmFam Field easily. And you could see it and you go, oh, okay, yep, we're dealing with the real deal here. He could really backspin balls the opposite direction. So I think that one, because Chourio's rookie year is going to be a thing that we're going to remember, and so associating that with like that home run in particular, I think is one that's going to stand out long term. I think you're going to see that highlight quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Morgoth 10 question here. Random thought question time. What would happen if Greg came back to manage the Brewers again? How much or how little forgiveness do we think the average fan might have? It's not unprecedented for a guy to come back. Right now, the feelings are a little bit raw, but who's to say how we feel in 5 or 10 years, Spencer? What do you think?
Yeah, I would imagine most would probably not forgive him for this one. And I would say a part of that is that I think a decent chunk of just fans in the fan base in general were not huge fans of Craig when he was here. So there would probably be a good chunk of them who hated him for leaving and also didn't think he was a good manager when he came back. So it would probably be, I would guess it'd be closer to 50-50 overall by the time, assuming it's not in like 2 years when I don't know that the wound will be completely healed at that point, but maybe in like a decade, if he finished his managerial career back in Milwaukee or something, then sure, I could see a good chunk of the fan base being fine with it at that point.
Yeah, his time with the Cubs would need to be kind of a failure. He'd need to like get
Yes.
fired from that job, I think, to make this real possible. Because otherwise, just like what, I don't see a path for it. But hell, if LeBron can go back to Cleveland, then anything is possible.
And leave them a second time.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was I don't think anybody bore him too much ill will for leaving that second time.
Because he won the title in Milwaukee. So Craig would probably need to win the title in
Right.
Milwaukee to kind of redo that. Yeah, I'm thinking like college football terms, right? Like, I don't know. This is random, but Rich Rodriguez left West Virginia like 15 years ago to Michigan, and that was a disaster. And now he's, again, the West Virginia head coach. So, time heals all wounds. Maybe it'll be fine. I don't know. Michael Parr next this week. There has been some talk about Francisco Rodriguez potentially going to the Hall of Fame someday. And if he did, would the Brewers retire number 57? Looking into it, his Brewers career seems not that different from Rollie Fingers, but they also didn't retire Ted Simmons' number. I love retiring number talk. Ryan, this is your platform to talk about how they never should have retired Raleigh's number to begin with. Go.
Yes, that is it. Yes, Rollie is the mistake. Rollie is the thing that shouldn't have happened. They never should have retired that number. And we even looked into that. It was like they randomly did it in like 1993 because I think they were just desperate to get butts in the seats or so. They never ever should have. I know he had a Cy Young. I know he had an MVP. I understand those things but those were also like he never should have had those things either. But that's getting into some BBWAA talk, which we could actually save that for a minute for another question. But yeah, Fingers' number never should have been retired. He's definitely an outlier. Obviously, Molitor and Yount, they're Hall of Famers who spent the bulk of their career. Well, Molitor spent most of his career here. Yount spent his entire career here. Aaron, you retire because he spent so much time in. Like, you don't do that if he hadn't played for like 12 years in Milwaukee previously, but he did. So you do that. It makes perfect sense. But Fingers should not have been retired, so no, you shouldn't do this. And K-Rod isn't that good, and he shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame anyway. He shouldn't be anywhere close to it, and that whole thing is kind of ridiculous anyway. So, yeah, K-Rod was a good high-leverage reliever for a while, who then kind of played out the string in his career and got to a high number of saves. But he is, like, Billy Wagner hopefully is going to go in this year. I think this is his last year on the ballot. And
it is, yeah.
Yeah, and, like, Billy Wagner is so much better than K-Rod. If you look at like run prevention, like how good he was at run prevention, like Billy Wagner is one of the few guys who you can actually kind of compare to Mariano Rivera, who had a really long career and was an elite run suppressor. And like the fact that Billy Wagner is having trouble getting in, K-Rod shouldn't be anywhere near the Hall of Fame. So the whole point really is moot. But yeah, no, Fingers shouldn't have been retired. Sorry, I can't bring up the subject without like going
it's
off
so
on
bad.
It.
Oh my god,
it's
no,
a mistake.
and we need to get rid of the stupid Hall of Fame rule because that ruins it on multiple fronts. I'm trying to pull up the skeet that I had in the last couple of weeks though, because I feel like this number retirement thing came up, and I actually looked at the Baseball Reference numbers, and CeCe Sabathia, who famously was a Brewer for like 3.5 months, only has like 100 fewer strikeouts than Rollie Fingers as a Brewer. Like, no, it's bad. Stop it. Just take the number down. I don't know.
No, see, that would be a level. Well, yeah,
screw you, Rollie.
Yeah, that would be a level of screw you, Rollie, that like we don't need to engage in. But yeah, like it was just a mistake. It was a mistake.
I don't know. MLB seems content erasing all of the Athletics history forever. So yeah, you may as well just delete that from history as well. All right. Morgoth 10. Another question this week, asking for a friend. If you were all to design the MKE tailgate drinking game, which rules are you implementing? I wish Paul was here for regression to the mean. Drink. I mean, that's an easy drink. Ryan, what's like a finish the bottle situation here?
Oh, finish the bottle. No, I mean the comparable to that for this podcast, the comparable to regression to the mean for this pod is reverse platoon splits, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Like 100%.
Spaghetti, first platoon splits, any of that. Take your pick. Yeah,
Yeah,
take a drink.
those would definitely be high on the list. Me saying something about like the the playoffs are a crapshoot, like that. Yeah, that would also be one like that. That would belong.
Steve would want me to say Ryan hedges on an opinion, so there's that. Yeah,
Steve would want you to say that.
I don't know. That's a fun one. I think we need to maybe think about this a little bit more and maybe revisit it. But anything else off the top of your head, Ryan? I don't know. I think those are the highlights for sure.
Well, so I wasn't like I listened to all the podcasts now. Like I didn't actually listen to the podcast like the first 100 episodes. Like didn't want to listen to them when Steve was producing them, but now I have to produce them, so I actually do listen to them now. Spencer, as somebody who was a listener to the podcast for such a long time, what are the other ones? Did we hit the big ones there? Like
You did. I was gonna say reverse platoon splits, so that was the main one I was thinking of.
Yeah, reverse platoon splits. Yeah, if that's a finish the bottle situation, we're gonna be killing people. So
Yeah.
like we don't want that. That would be bad. Don't need that on my conscience. But yeah, I think we hit most of the big ones there. There have been ones that have come in and out of favor. Ones that Craig Timber obviously like it had seasonal use like that sort of thing. But yeah.
All right. Last question this week, of course, comes from Tricky Henderson. And Ricky Henderson passed away this week, kind of unexpectedly. I don't think anybody realized that maybe he was having some health issues. But so obviously the namesake for Tricky Henderson. So Tricky's writing this week, thinking of Ricky Henderson, who left Earth too soon, and the unmatchable presence he had on the diamond. What current Brewer do you forecast as the greatest disruptor in 2025? The one player who can take a ton of pitches, get on base, aggravate the entire defense by taking bases, long leads, play stylish defense, and perhaps even third person the pants off an opposing manager. Peace and love to Ricky. One of the reasons for the season. So I don't know. Thinking about this, part of me would love it if Jackson Chourio had that kind of swagger, but also Spencer, it's funny for me to think about Bryce Terang referencing himself in the third person. What do you think?
Yeah, that's Chourio was the one it felt like in terms of actual production on the field could maybe do what Ricky Henderson, that type of thing. Obviously not quite to that level on the stolen bases, especially, but yeah, I mean, Garrett Mitchell talks like Ryan Braun a little bit. If you ever listen to him,
sure.
Very similar. So I could totally see him referencing himself as Garrett or something. So I'll go with Garrett Mitchell. That'll be my answer for this one.
Yeah, I just on the current team, it's impossible. But like the era is gone where you could have a player like that. Everybody's so cautious and careful now to be that brash. Like somebody like Tony Plush had that kind of, but it was also, it curdled a little bit like that. There was an edge to him that, I don't know, I'm sure Ricky had his spats and had his dust ups and whatever, because it was also a different era. But yeah, that era just feels sort of gone. But just to put a finer point on this, I'm looking at the all-time WAR leaders right now on this, and I don't know that everybody really realizes how great Ricky Henderson was. I mean, if you're listening to this, you probably have a much better idea, but like I'm looking at it right now. Ricky Henderson, you know who he's in between? For all-time baseball reference WAR, on the baseball reference WAR leaderboard, he's number 14th all-time. He's sandwiched in between Lou Gehrig and Mel Ott. And the guys who come after him here, you have Mel Ott, you have Mickey Mantle, you have Frank Robinson, you have Nap Lajoie, and you have Mike Schmidt, Albert Pujols, Joe Morgan, Yastrzemski, like the guys that he is ahead of, like the people that are ahead of him are the inner circle of inner circle Hall of Famers. We lost an inner circle Hall of Famer, and I don't know that everybody quite gets that, the extent to which he was that. And this is where I want to just point out, for those of you that didn't see my my post on this, because it was mentioned by Michael Schur, by Ken Tremendous on Blue Sky, that there were 28 people that didn't vote for Rickey Henderson to get into the Hall of Fame. There were 28 people that looked at Rickey Henderson and said, no, not a Hall of Famer. And one of them, famously, this actually was kind of a big deal, that this is what people really started talking about. Hey, we need to get the older writers who don't cover baseball and haven't paid any attention to it in decades. We need to get them out of the voting pool on this because it's ridiculous. There was one guy who voted for Matt Williams and didn't vote for Rickey Henderson.
Yeah.
Because he was from Arizona and Matt Williams played in Arizona. And so he voted for Matt Williams and didn't vote for Rickey effing Henderson. And so it is actually, it's a nice way to kind of look back and go, it's gotten a lot better. Like the voting for awards and for the Hall of Fame is so much better than what it was when you were a tyke, Spencer, when you were like, we were fighting these battles back in like 2005, 2000, like insane things like Rickey Henderson, 28 people deciding that Rickey freaking Henderson wasn't a Hall of Famer. That was just like, you know, another day of the way things went back then. It was just absolutely insane. Yeah. But Henderson is the greatest leadoff hitter of all time. I don't think there's really any real question about that, because I think there's some other guys like Ty Cobb, but I don't think he led off most of the time. I think he was mostly hitting third. Henderson's the greatest leadoff hitter of all time, and just some of the numbers you look at his statistics for his career are just absolutely mind-boggling. He was just so good at basically everything. Like, he was a much better power hitter than people remember too. Like, he was just a really good all-around hitter, player, everything, and one of the all-time greats, and also just an extremely unique human being, right? Like, just an incredibly unique human being. Have you guys seen it? I know a bunch of people have shared this. Have you seen the stuff about him, what he always said when they were voting for playoff shares?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And we can break the seal for this. Go for it.
Yeah. Oh, well, actually, what is you could say the actual quote, because like I don't remember the exact words, but he was
it was something like they were voting on the postseason chairs, and maybe some vets were kind of stiffing the full shares on some guys who were barely up or whatever. And Rickey says, fuck that full share. You're changing somebody's life. Like, come on. And that's kind of the guy he was, you know, like he's, like you said, a no doubt Hall of Famer who played 20 plus years, and he's still looking out for like the end of roster guys. Like, yeah, give him $200,000. Who cares? Like, it's not my money. Go for it. Yeah.
Yeah. He would shout out full share every time he was yelling full share. Fuck that. You could change somebody's life. Yeah. We've lost a lot with Rickey Henderson. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a tough one, especially it coming out of nowhere like that. Just all of a sudden, no indication, no previous thing. Sometimes, you know, there's long period when guys get to be certain ages, and there's long periods of ill health and whatever. But this was just, this was completely out of the blue.
Yeah, I always think of like Julio Franco as the ageless wonder who played forever, but Rickey played until he was 44 in 2003, and he was above replacement level at age 44. Are you kidding me? Like, oh my God.
Well, and then he was out there playing for like the Long Island Ducks or whatever in like the independent league too, because he didn't want to stop playing baseball. He just didn't want to. He didn't want to give it up. He didn't want to leave. And Paul was kind of talking about that too in our group chat. Like, he was kind of surprised because it just seemed like, you know, Rickey Henderson is like, he was in such good shape at such an advanced age and was still, you know, a great athlete. You just had the feel like he was probably a workout warrior, somebody who was doing that, and so it was even more surprising from that perspective.
I do, and I know we're like 90 minutes into this episode, so we'll wrap up soon, I swear to God. But also, I saw another thing circling around. It was like a screen cap from an old ESPN game, and it was Rickey Henderson's rules for a long career. Number 1 was run 3 to 5 miles every other day. Number 2 is do 200 sit-ups and 100 push-ups a day. dude was like 40 at the time. I'm 36 and I can't do that. Stretch before bedtime. And number 4 was eat plenty of ice cream. So, like it's the little things in life. In between running 3 miles every other day. But oh my God, we lost a good one. That legend.
Yeah.
All
absolute
right.
legend.
Before we go this week, Ryan, who do we have joining us in the patron ranks at patreon.com/MKE tailgate?
Welcome to Dan Quam and Jack Metlock for joining us. We really appreciate it. Thanks for signing up and becoming part of the team here at Milwaukee's Tailgate /RAE.
Absolutely. A reminder, $2 a month, question priority, both on this podcast or on the Packers Reporting as Eligible podcast. $5 a month level gets you the extra stuff, including the minor league extra with Ryan and Spencer. And even if you're not a patron, you can support us another way. Go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you're listening to us right now. Give us a 5-star review. And while you're there, please be sure to hit the subscribe or follow button to make sure you never miss an episode. If for some reason you do miss an episode, go to brewerfanatic.com as well. They are cross-posting this as part of a little arrangement that we have going on. Spencer does another podcast for them. So, Spencer, as he mentioned at the top of the show, very busy with all these podcasts, but appreciate the insight as always, Spencer. Thanks for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And, I think it's time we wrap this up. We went a full 90 minutes for like the first time I can maybe remember in a long time. But, it'll work out well. We're taking off next week for the holidays. So you get a supersized episode this week to kind of tide you over the holidays. We are currently planning to take the next weekend off and we'll be back in the new year. But obviously, the caveat always being if the Brewers do something wild and crazy and dumb, we'll be back to talk about it here. In the meantime, happy holidays, everybody. Thanks for joining us this week. We'll see you in the new year in 2025. Thanks for listening to Milwaukee's Tailgate. Have a good one.